Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
Hello everyone, this is Jack with the Book Club from Hell, a craft of real brewery making the world's most racist IPAs. Curtis Yarvin, also known as Mencius Moldbug, is among the most interesting countercultural thinkers to have appeared in the Anglophone world in quite some time. He's an American blogger and tech entrepreneur who founded Urbit in 2002 and, more relevantly for today's episode, the blog Unqualified Reservations in 2007. He stopped updating Unqualified Reservations in 2013, later starting a Substack newsletter called Grey Mirror of the Nihilist Prince in 2020. His views are anti-egalitarian, anti-democratic, cameralist and monarchist, and he's a high-speed dispensary of neologisms and new terms. One such term is the Cathedral, a concept which he lays out in his 2021 blog post, A Brief Explanation of the Cathedral, which we're covering in this episode. Now, for the obligatory bit of shilling. We've got a Patreon account, and we'd love it if you'd support us. We've also got a Discord server, link in the show notes. You can tell us there how badly we've butchered Yarvin's ideas here. So, if you're ready to understand why government, academia, and journalists all march in lockstep, then listen on. Enjoy. Yeah, we need to lean even more into amateurishness, I think. Things in the world are just getting too polished. What we need to do is have more long pauses between saying things, clear our throats more often into the microphone, cough into the microphone more often. Instead of me noise gating things, maybe I'll try to do an inverse noise gate. So I'll just make background noise as loud as possible and then try to block out any of our speech.
Or just introduce new forms of background noise.
Yeah. I could probably EQ this to make it a lot muddier. There are so many things I could do to make the podcast sound worse. If you could not merely not read the books that we're meant to be reading for episodes, but somehow reverse read them. Read something which is just the polar opposite of what we're meant to be reading, and then you can talk about that, and then I'll just read something unrelated and talk about that. There are a lot of ways that we could make this much worse.
How can we just make this as bad as we can? It's just a worst listener experience ever.
Well, there are easy ways. This, instead of 2 hours of us talking about Curtis Yarvin, this could be 2 hours of harsh noise. That's one way. This could just be the brown note for 2 hours. So you listen to it and you lose control of your bowels and shit yourself for 2 hours.
It could just
That'd
be
a good episode.
Jazz. What was that?
Jazz. You mean because what? Yeah.
Hours,
if you're an Evolian, then
saxophone.
it could just be jazz, which was the worst.
It could just be jazz.
The absolute. This could be just for This could be an unpleasant podcast tailor-made for Evolians who hate jazz. It's just 2 hours of Duke Ellington. Just something really, really inoffensive. Not even the weird shit.
So we're talking about Curtis Yarvin today.
Yeah, we'll work on those good ideas of making this aggressively unpleasant. But in the meantime, let's talk about Curtis Yarvin.
Yeah, we'll pick that up later. Yeah, interesting. How did you hear about Curtis Yarvin?
He's been... So I was
just on your radar.
Far from first
Jack's just been
to the Curtis Yarvin party because I think he's been blogging from like...
Masturbating.
I think it was 2007 that Unqualified Reservations, his first blog, started. I heard about him much later than that. I think it was during uni, I think it was the early 2010s. I became aware of him, but never read much of his work. It's like I skimmed it because I thought it was kind of funny that there was an American seriously arguing for monarchism. But then I kind of forgot about him. And then we started this podcast and I remembered him. Yeah, the reason I was aware of him is not because I'm deep into like the dark enlightenment ecosystem or neo-reactionary stuff like that. It's just because I've always enjoyed looking for really strange points of view or strange subcultures and then reading about them. Like I sniffed him out in the same way or in the same spirit that I'd found myself on like Vor fan fiction pages. Just wanted to find something really fucking weird.
Vor fan fiction.
I will say I take Curtis Yarvin a lot more seriously than Vor fan fiction. That's Yeah. Look, I'm sure I'll make jokes about him during this episode, but I do take him seriously as a thinker. He does come up with some conclusions that I don't really agree with. And yeah, I'll have some criticisms of what we read of him today, but I do take the guy seriously. He's clearly really smart, revoltingly well read, and he's willing to entertain ideas that are deeply unpopular to an extent because I think he just likes being in opposition to stuff. Temperamentally,
He's
if we
punching up.
did live in a monarchy, he probably would be arguing for just full on liberal democracy or anarchy or something like that. But he combines intelligence with a willingness to entertain some strange or unpopular ideas, which makes him worth listening to and very interesting to read. Also for you, Levi, because it'd be interesting for you because he has a background in computer science. I think he started a PhD in computer science at I think UC Berkeley, but dropped out because he
Mm,
joined a tech startup. He also
yeah, right.
he launched Urbit
Nice.
as well. I forget when that was. I think early two
Yeah,
thousands. It was ages ago.
yeah, yeah. He's been working on it for a
And
while.
and I think he also had a startup which got money from Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, which basically expanded the Urbit ecosystem. I forget the name of it, Tlon or something like that. He's actually quite an accomplished computer scientist as well, and startup founder. The guy is really interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I haven't read a huge amount into it, but when I after reading the article that we've read today, which is the Cathedral explained, um,
Yeah, brief explanation of
which
the
is on his
Cathedral, published
which
21st
is
January
on his
2021.
Substack.
Yeah. I'll
He's
put a
got a
link to his Substack in the
Substack,
show notes so people can read it for themselves because it's really short. And it's,
Grey Mirror.
oh, well, spoiler, I think it's worth reading. I'd recommend this.
Yeah. So I started reading some of his other things because he's really into Bitcoin. Um, and I find that really interesting to read because there's a subsection and maybe
Interesting. Anything that even mentions Bitcoin gets you interested.
yeah. Because there's this weird thing with Bitcoin where it's like the minimalist approach to it would be minimalist non anti Bitcoiner, but the minimalist sort of pro Bitcoin approach would just be something along the lines of this is a useful technology for storing your wealth into the future, um, because it's scarce and decentralized and secure, and you don't have to say anything more than that. You could say like it doesn't even need to become like a currency really in order for it to still be a really interesting technology that you should learn about. And then you've got like that is like almost the minimalist position that you can take. And then there's the extreme other end, which would be like it's going to transform the world in some crazy way because like money's so tied to our sense of like social cooperation, and then it intersects with the state and power structures, and it's going to demonetize the US, and then there's people who talk about like people having these like ontological spiritual transformations because of the pure truth of the network and stuff like that. It's a truth virus, and it makes you a more honest person.
Evola was completely wrong when he talked about ontological transformation via the use of true rituals or true initiation rites. What he really meant to say was through the understanding of the blockchain, you become ontologically transformed.
The truth chain. It's the truth chain. So, and then there's this subsection Bitcoiners, and Cypherdina Moose has like played with these ideas, and Robert Breedlove as well. And it's really interesting because they talk about like, and I think it's been influenced by Curtis Yarvin, and his like part of the internet, basically saying like there's issues with democracy, the whether it's incentive issues or around like essentially like perverse incentives between like the politicians and then using their power to like and their ability to print money and taxation to like buy votes and that sort of stuff. So some Bitcoiners that are almost like they're like anti-democratic, and they say Bitcoin is like helping create a kind of post democracy world where I know there's this one idea of like network states or free city states where there is no like democratic institutions. Everything is just run on like private contracts between individuals and and stuff like that. And then there's people like Curtis Yarvin, who's like, no, we just need a monarchy or some sort of like autocracy, but they also have Bitcoin for some reason.
Yeah,
It's really weird.
his view on Bitcoin's interesting because he predicted its demise quite a while ago because he said that eventually, or likely, states will just flat out ban the ability to convert between Bitcoin and fiat currencies to try to kill it.
Yeah, he's pretty wrong.
He seems to
he's pretty
think
wrong on
that
that one.
it still definitely could happen, but he says that one of the arguments against that happening was that he's been predicting this for ages and he keeps getting it wrong. So he basically says, "Take it as you will." He's
Yeah,
really
but
interesting. After reading a brief explanation of the Cathedral, I started reading his other stuff because I haven't really
yeah,
read
he's really interesting.
stuff he's written since probably first year of my undergraduate degree. It's fun to come back. He has a real logorrhea approach to writing. It's just a bit of verbal
He's deeply
diarrhea
pessimistic.
interspersed with
He's deeply pessimistic.
pessimist. Yeah, he's got a bit of that. Much of what he
That
seems to
dark
advocate
right.
for. This is not in the brief explanation of the Cathedral. This is in other things he's written. And I should preface all of this by saying that I'm far from a Curtis Yarvin scholar. I would be surprised if I'd even
Specialized.
read 5% of his output because this guy's prolific. But for people,
Mold
so
biology.
to contextualize it, this guy is, along with Nick Land and a few others, I'm not sure if they accept the term, but they are associated with this movement called the Dark Enlightenment, which is it's, it's a masturbatory name, or the neo-reactionary movement. And
Masturbatory.
that you're
Yeah.
Dark Enlightenment.
It really is dark
It sounds
enlightenment,
so
bro.
fucking stupid.
As they say with their fucking nachos shoved like nacho powder on their fucking face. Crack open a
People
pen.
who
Pepsi Max.
identify themselves with the Dark Enlightenment are the sort of people that I imagine also just keep talking about dark academia, fashion sense, which just
The
seems
deep
to be like
state.
an over intellectualization of wearing fucking corduroy pants. It's like, just calm down, mate. Anyway, what was I saying? So he, Nick Land, and a few others are associated with this neo-reactionary movement, which is anti-egalitarian, anti-democratic. Quite
They've been accused of being
both
racist.
Yarvin and Land have a real preoccupation with technology and how it will change the world as well. And Yarvin, in among other things, in his description of how to resist progressivism, argues more for a passive approach. So he regularly says that owning the libs or just repeatedly trying to antagonize the people he sees as the ruling class, a progressivist
Just
ruling
like
class,
went to UC
is
Berkeley and just
not
came out a fucking asshole.
it's not productive because it allows progressivism to have a foil or a heel, and it allows those people
He's just playing the heel.
to say this is
It's
why
so
we
good.
need to go even further with progressive ideals because there exists this nasty racist, xenophobic, homophobic, transphobic, etc. group of people, which is why we need to lean even further into the progressivist project. Whereas Yarvin, in many places, seems to be arguing for right-leaning people instead of fighting cultural war issues to create ways of exiting that sort of confected argument.
Which definitely is aligned with his Urbit project. Like
I was
that's
about to say that, yeah, Urbit is
yeah.
very much in keeping with that.
Urbit is actually really cool. Like I have a lot of respect for his Urbit project. Like even just from an engineering perspective, it's really cool. Computer
Could
science
you
perspective, I
offer
think it's really
a
cool.
description of what's going on with Urbit? Like, I know what Urbit does at a very basic level, but you're also a software engineer. Like, you have a much better idea of what's going on than I do. Like when I see Urbit, I think, oh, that's cool, and then that's about the level of understanding I have of it.
Yeah, so essentially, like, there's this thing called the there's two major network architectures um, on the internet, and are there any others other than this? There might be other forms other than this possible, but these are the two major types. There's peer-to-peer networks, and there's client server architectures. And if you imagine like, and there are others, there's like hierarchical peer-to-peer and that sort of stuff. But I'll just explain those two very quickly. The client server model is essentially like you have a node, a computer, a node um, that is responsible for compute and data storage, and is like this. When we say like the server, it's the one that's processing requests, and then the client in the classic sort of like 90s web, the client was just like a dumb like web page. It just like a browser, ask for a web page, get the web page back, render the information, and not do like anything other than just kind of like asking for information and sending like mutations to the server or requests and mutations to the server. And like all your big tech companies are client server models. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. That's fine. That's a way to deliver plenty of functionality and stuff to people. But the alternative is like peer to peer network architectures. Like the OG one before everybody learned about Bitcoin and blockchain was like the torrents. In particular, like uTorrent was the big one.
What
So
about
peer to peer,
LimeWire?
LimeWire, yeah, Tor.
LimeWire is the best place to
Um,
accidentally download Trojans and porn when you're just looking for MP3s of like.
yeah, accidentally download a Trojan horse of a horse literally fucking a woman. Yeah, thanks. I just like
Good old
destroyed my
LimeWire. Old
9-year-old
faithful.
brain. Just like a horrible fucking experience on the internet. Just fucking traumatizing. But yeah, so a peer, like when we say peer to peer, what we mean is like there's not a clear distinction between when a node is acting as the client or acting as the server. A single node can act as both the server, so the data storage and compute processor. Like it's kind of like a matter of responsibility. Like what responsibilities do you have? You can both act as a client, so asking for stuff of others, and as the server, doing stuff for others. And the classic ones are like the torrents. The other classic one is like Bitcoin. That's like the most famous peer-to-peer network other
It's the best
than
thing ever,
like the internet itself.
basically.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool. So Urbit is like basically a project uh, to try to like get rid of the uh, the client server architecture on the web, or at least like create a decentralized alternative network, which is like peer to peer. It's like a peer to peer protocol for communicating. Like you set up these like little Urbit like nodes. You can have your own little node, and you can run like the Urbit operating system, and essentially like I think it's supposed to be like a full compute solution where you can own like basically the entire stack. So it's like you're running an OS, but this OS has like um uh it has this like peer-to-peer functionality built baked in from the ground up. And when I was listening to this one person talk about it, it was really interesting. It's like, yeah, you can. It's they have this replay log where you can like record your like every single transformation that your computer's done and like log it. And then if you need to like take your computer off like AWS and redeploy it like I don't know on your own hardware or something, you can get back your node. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know a lot of the technical details. Sorry, I can't probably say much more than that.
That is
Except that
so
it's a
much
really
more
interesting
information than I could
project.
have given.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I guess like the idea is like it's there's a class of technologies, or how do I put this? I think the world is becoming more and more cyberpunk. At least the world that I live in. And sometimes I just like technologies if they just seem as though they could be out of a William Gibson or what's the other guy's name who wrote Snow
Neil
Crash?
Stevenson's one of
Neil Stevenson
the big ones.
or yeah, so Neil sorry, excuse me, a Neil Stevenson model novel. And yeah, Urbit is one of those things. Where it's like
I
you
just love
imagine,
technologies that make my
yeah.
life more like the Cyberpunk 2077 game. Anything that makes me uncontrollably T-pose and then clip through the ground is really cool in my book.
So you got to respect. There's I don't so you got to respect Curtis. I think on the level of like he walks the talk. You know, like there are people who
Yeah, that's a good
um
point.
just like a sideline commentators or whatever, and you know don't actually go out there and do anything other than just like talk shit. And Curtis, at least, like he has these values. He goes out there and he expresses his point of view, whether or not you like him, and he sticks by it. And then he actually puts it into action through like building technology to help like bring the world that he wants to create into reality. Which I think, if nothing else, that's respectable.
Yeah, it's cool. He's not just complaining. He's actually trying to construct a world or construct tools that would allow the sort of world he wants to come into being.
So,
It's
despite
like Osama
maybe
bin
the
Laden, another
pessimism,
one of my big influences.
like Osama, yeah. So, despite some of his pessimism, or at least the way that he writes seems like pretty pessimistic, or the stuff that I was reading, his actions are kind of saying that he thinks that he can actually do something about it and provide at least like even if it's a minor alternative like system to sort of like centralized digital architectures. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
One of his biggest concepts is that of the cathedral, which is the theme of the particular essay that we're covering today. And this idea of the cathedral has been present since pretty early on in at least in his blogging career. I'm not sure if he'd come up with it before he started blogging. I'm not enough of a Curtis Yarvin archivist to really know when precisely it arose.
If there are any
But
Curtis Yarvin archivists listening to this podcast, please like join our Discord and let us know how we can find out
yeah,
more.
join our Discord. It's like when we asked for if we could have someone who was a Muslim to ask questions of for the Nation of Islam episode because we don't know much. And that people actually volunteered, and then we read Nation of Islam stuff, and I told them, no, actually, don't worry, none of this is all bullshit. Uh, Similarly, if there are people who are religiously devoted to Curtis Yarvin, we'll ask you some questions to make sure our Yarvinomics are correct. Yeah, so what is the cathedral? So the cathedral basically is journalism plus academia. And he says in our society today, it so at the time of writing in 2021, this still holds for 2023, I imagine. It functions similarly to how the Catholic Church functioned in medieval society. It was the intellectual institution at the center of society. Similarly, today, journalism plus academia form this distributed center, this distributed intellectual center of our society. And the question he's really seeking to answer in this essay is basically okay, so in medieval times, the church more or less agreed with itself. Like you'd have dissent and things like that. But broadly speaking, it was fairly internally consistent in the views that it expressed. He says similarly, journalism plus academia also seem to move in lockstep. They all have the same opinions. How is it that these various institutions like Harvard, Yale, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, he's talking about it in the American context, but this does actually export pretty well to other, at least Anglophone liberal democracies like Australia, Canada. How is it that these institutions over time all seem to hold the same opinions? What is this? What is coordinating them? Because he says, for example, in 1951, they all had the same opinions. In 2021, they all have the same opinions. However, for example, 2021 Harvard would disagree with 1951 Harvard. Similarly, 2021 Yale would disagree with 1951 Yale. However, at those two time points, those two institutions would agree with each other. So, what is organizing them? That's the answer he's seeking to. That's the question he's seeking to answer in this essay.
And importantly, like in a fascist totalitarian state, you could just say, well, the Politburo is coordinating the actions of the intellectuals and
Yeah,
journalists.
yeah.
But I suppose to the degree that he's not a conspiracy theorist, which at least in this particular essay he didn't posit any like deep state coordination. Um, that's an interesting question because he's basically saying, okay, well, let's say there's not just like some dark cabal intentionally coordinating this. What could be like a systems level explanation of this phenomena?
And the very fact that the cathedral is distributed is an important part of its legitimacy
Yeah,
because we, at least today, maintain, I think rightly, that to trust a single organization with everything is foolhardy because if that organization is wrong on something, then you're also going to believe something incorrect. Whereas when it comes to the cathedral, you have all of these different institutions believing the same thing. And you could say, okay, well, if one august institution believes something, then they might just be getting it wrong. But if a large number of august institutions all believe the same thing, then statistically, it's probably correct, isn't it? If all these smart people believe the same thing, then it must be right.
yeah, it's
And
really interesting.
that,
He's saying
yeah,
like there's a
that
constellation of institutions.
distributed feature is a legitimating function.
There's a distributed constellation of institutions that are not centrally controlled and yet have a tightly correlated evolution of ideas.
Yeah,
It's an interesting
yeah.
problem.
He says, okay, so it's sort of expected that, for example, in the hard sciences or in maths, you're going to have a lot of coordination.
Before we move on to the hard sciences, Jack, sorry to interrupt. Can we maybe first um, talk about whether or not we agree with that characterization? Like, is that a thing? Is the cathedral a thing? What do you reckon?
I do think that universities overall do tend to hold the same beliefs. I guess just people who've gone through universities tend to hold the same sort of beliefs that are prevalent at universities, which makes a lot of sense. Governments tend to be staffed by people who've gone through universities and they tend to hold the same beliefs. Journalists oftentimes will hold similar beliefs. There are counterpoints to it. So, for example, in the United States, Fox News, extremely popular, less popular after Tucker Carlson left. And those people will hold different beliefs to, say, someone at the New York Times. But yeah, someone at the ABC is going to probably hold different beliefs to someone working at, I don't know, the Australian or something like that in the Australian context. But
Because couldn't a
I don't
left
think it's
wing?
as monolithic as Yarvin makes it out to be. But I would say that there's a strong progressive bias in terms of the number of people who believe in progressive ideals
Yeah,
at universities, in government, in journalism, and things like that.
and yeah, it's interesting. I am of mixed opinion on it because I see what he's talking about on one level, but then I also think, well, look at the last 20 years, the rise of independent media, like Curtis Yarvin,
Hmm.
and like technology is
Yeah,
allowing more and more. I mean, you just go to Substack; he's publishing on an independent media. I mean, it's a client servant cuck model, but it's still a platform in principle that is like facilitating a bunch of alternative points of view to be able to like create sustainable business like content businesses, and that's just been like eating the traditional media paradigm for a long time. And then like also digital education and the rise of alternative forms of education are also just like starting. Probably the effect hasn't been felt yet, except it seems like it's this oncoming tsunami that's going to or is in the process of changing educational institutions.
That's fair. Okay, so I'm happy to play the Curtis Yarvin Steelman
Yeah, Steelman him.
in response to
Yeah,
that.
do it.
I guess, like, my guess is that you could say that, yes, there are alternative media platforms now available, like, of which we are taking advantage.
But what city did they come from? San Francisco.
Not so much that,
They're all
more
run
I'd
by
say that
a bunch of progressives.
they're not anywhere close to power. So while a government will take notice of what, say, The Age in Victoria says about it, they don't give a shit about what some person's writing about them on Substack. Similarly, when they're looking for advice on policy, they don't give a shit about what some Substack writer is saying or what someone with a Udemy course is saying. They're going to look at a large established institution like the University of Melbourne or RMIT.
I've got 3 self-directed learning certificates from Udemy. I'm now an expert in, I know, social policy. Like, give me, they're going to listen to me. It's like I just clicked completed on all of the videos and then just printed off the PDF. Gets a job in government.
Copied all my answers off GitHub.
I just chat GPT the whole thing.
So I guess the issue is not that alternative sorts of information do or don't exist, because undeniably they do exist. The important thing is the relationship between those sources of information and power.
Okay.
And while they might become more influential in the future, they still don't have nearly the same power or access to
I'm
power
going to give you
that
Steelman,
what Yarvin would describe as the Cathedral has.
You're right now like pseudo Yarvin. Yeah, you're pseudo Yarvin.
Actually, no, I'm not going to imitate his voice. If anyone's heard him interviewed, he has a very distinctive way of speaking, which I can't imitate.
Given
that Australia doesn't exist, enough of my brain power is dedicated towards faking the accent of the land that doesn't exist, and I can't jump from that to a Curtis Yarvin impression, unfortunately. My acting skills only go so far.
My question is, what about Murdoch Media? Isn't Murdoch Media quite right-wing, and it's like the largest media organization in the world, if not like one of the largest for sure, and most powerful? Both largest and politically influential.
So this is not based on this particular essay, but I'm gathering this from other essays. I say I, as Curtis Yarvin, reading my own essays, because I am now playing the role of Curtis
You're Yarvin GPT.
Chat GPT told to act like Curtis Yarvin.
We should probably do that, actually, shouldn't we?
That's not a bad idea.
Have a conversation with ChatGPT.
The problem is ChatGPT is a notorious cuckold and wouldn't be willing to spit the truth that Yarvin
does. The mind of ChatGPT is changed by these fucking
ChatGPT is married. ChatGPT's wife just gets railed by Bard regularly while ChatGPT sits in the closet and masturbates. That's ChatGPT. What were you? Oh yeah, you were asking about Murdoch before he started making cuckold jokes. Which is basically just obligatory AI. Every episode, I think.
Yeah.
We should try to make it through an entire episode without making cuckold jokes.
Talking about Bitcoin.
I'm not sure we could do it.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to talk about Bitcoin, cuckoldry, weird porn, nuking something. I don't even know what we'd talk about.
Oh, we'd actually have to engage with one another and like talk about something substantive. Fuck that.
Yeah, we'd have to do something rather than just regurgitate catchphrases at each other.
My limited repertoire of like chat.
So the thing is, I guess Murdoch's media empire still exists within a progressive paradigm. What Murdoch does is waits for progressives to propose some new change to culture and then says, no, I don't like it, slow down. But over time, inevitably acquiesces to it. And then it's like a step function. And once they've acquiesced to it, progressives will propose something new, and Murdoch's media empire will say, no, we don't like it, for a while, and then acquiesce to it. And so you just keep having that ratchet function.
Yeah.
What the Murdoch press exist as they're a foil within a progressive paradigm.
They're a heel. They are also a heel, aren't
So
they?
they're not a meaningful opposition.
Yeah, Murdoch gets
Yeah,
pulled
they're the
out as the
heel.
fucking heel. Yeah, that's true. That's actually a good point.
Yeah.
Wow, thanks, Yarvin GPT. That was a great response.
It's all me. Yarvin GPT.
Now, can you write this bit of code for me?
Look, I could write code for you. I don't know if it'll work. I can write shit Python code as Jack GPT. Python's
so
already
funny.
known for being blazing fast, but Python written by Jack is even faster.
Blazing
Holy shit, you would
fast.
not believe
Blazing fast
how
and safe.
lean this code is.
And elegant.
Oh yeah,
safe,
you'll find
elegant, and
it will
fast
throw
is what
up
I think
no
of when I think of
errors
Python.
really quickly.
No errors. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing language.
Well, just wait till you see the magic I can work with Python.
Hello world. Print hello world.
Print hello world. Your computer just catches fire.
Turns out Urbit is just print hello world. You just download this like 16 gigabyte.
Print hello
and it's just, all it does is just prints hello world until your computer burns.
It's just peer-to-peer nodes telling each other to print hello world.
Print hello world.
There's a million computers to return hello world.
Just printing hello world.
That's actually all it does.
That's all it does. It's just going to paperclip AI the world, except it's going to be print hello world instead of
paperclip the universe. It'll just dedicate all the resources of the universe to making computers, which will request from all the other nodes in the universe network to print hello world.
This is called it's like flooding the network. The flooding protocol to just print hello world.
It'll arrange the stars of the Milky Way galaxy in such a way that they will spell out hello world when viewed from any angle outside the Milky Way.
Here's the basic algorithm. Keep a list of peers, send a message every second to each of my peers telling them to print hello world. And whenever I receive a message from one of my peers to print hello world, and then tell each one of my peers to also print hello world. That's the entire protocol.
You reach the recursion limit of the universe by doing that. You just break reality after a while.
That turns out that's actually how the universe was created. We are the hello world of the previous universe, just eating itself. And that's like the universe collapses into a single black hole of hello world, and then we create a new one. Create a new universe.
We are the fever dreams of a dying universe, which has been cracked in half by too much hello world.
It turns out the ripples in the cosmic background radiation, like the fluctuations in it, it's just like those were the parts where there was like, I don't know, like an overflow or something in the Hello World program.
Yeah,
from the previous universe.
That's just it's a map of Hello World densities. Like
if you actually
world was more dense.
If you squint when you're looking at the cosmic background radiation, you'll just see like a faint outline of Curtis Yarvin's face.
Yeah. How does Curtis Yarvin tie into all of this?
We're living in the shadow of Curtis Yarvin.
He's a pivotal figure in the hello worldization of the universe, but we can't quite work out how.
It's like the Kali Yuga. He's been reincarnated as Curtis Yarvin to reinstantiate the Hello World
That's what
program.
The Kali Yuga is when the proportion of hello worlds in the universe gets too high, we enter the Kali Yuga. Okay, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, whether we accept the central idea that the cathedral exists. I think that's what we were talking about before we.
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting. Yeah. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't agree that it's as monolithic, but I'm basically happy to say, okay, well, why don't we just like focus? Let's say like just because like given his context as like coming from UC Berkeley and the sort of technology that he's interested in creating, like he sees like one of his focal points as like being a counterforce against that part of society that does fit his description. Whether or not it's the dominant form or not, like we'll put that conversation aside and we'll just like take his characterization as given.
Yeah. Well, I do think at least among people of the class who will be journalists, and academics, because the Cathedral is journalism and academia, at least in his formulation, I do think progressive ideals are dominant.
Yeah.
There is, I mean, there's the counterbalance of, I think, broadly speaking, in the business community, that people who start their own businesses and things, they might be progressive, they might not be, but it's not nearly as front of mind as it is for someone who's spent a lot of time at university.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's also very Anglo-centric.
I guess, like, if I'm going to revert to my role as Yarvin bot, you'd say that because those people advertise and try to sell products to people who do care deeply about progressive ideals, you have companies, particularly large companies, become de facto advertisers for progressivism by using progressive symbols and progressive talking points to sell products.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, we've complained about it so many times on this show. It's like some sort of clothing company or something like that. Oh, Nike probably doesn't actually give a fuck about progressive issues, but it sells a lot of shoes, so they say they do. So whether or not the leadership of Nike truly believes in these things, they de facto become servants of the Cathedral because they're trying to sell shoes. My guess, like, I get as Yarvin bot, that's the best I can do.
And he doesn't. What's important is he calls it the Cathedral. He's called it. What I do, I really appreciate. Shout out to Yarvin for not being an anti-Semite because he called it the Cathedral and not the others, and not the synagogue. The synagogue.
Yeah, so one thing with Yarvin that I like on his behalf, and I dislike about the commentary on him, is very regularly he's described as like a vicious sexist, racist, anti-Semite, and everythingist. But he doesn't strike me, actually, in what I've read of him, as someone who is racist or sexist or anti-Semitic or something like that. He's definitely profoundly anti-democratic, which is, I think, where people get angry with him. But this is also a broad complaint that we have on this podcast. Just because someone is anti-democratic or dislikes a thing that you like doesn't immediately make them Hitler.
Yeah.
Which is a common cultural form, and
he just strikes me as like a bit of an edgelord, a bit spurgy, and like honestly, I think he would fit in on like our Discord.
Our Discord server.
So shout out to
Curtis Yarvin, if you're listening, which I know you are. There's an open invitation to our Discord server, which I'm sure you'd love to join.
F. Gardner came along. He had a good time. Occasionally jumps in, talks about, I don't know, like some Theravada Buddhism or something.
He fucking law dumps you on Buddhism and stuff like that.
And then we'll just pimp his fucking books. He's a consummate salesperson.
Shout out to F. Gardner. He's actually a really friendly guy. He's really nice.
You're a champion, F. Gardner. He's so good. Yeah, he's really nice. Yeah. I mean, we talked so much shit about him, then he joined the Discord.
Anyway, so if we can have someone like F. Gardner on, we can have someone infinitely less influential like Curtis Yarvin. Surely.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, all right. So moving forward, we've got the Cathedral.
Right. So we'll just accept that the Cathedral exists in as monolithic a form as Yarvin sets out.
Yeah. And then where I interrupted you and just completely derailed the conversation was we're talking about like hard sciences.
Talking about Hello World.
Hard sciences and maths are coordinated by what he says are basically like reality and our ignorance of reality, and how there's like this like forcing function with the reality in, say, mathematics is he thinks it's cut and dry. I actually don't think it's that cut and dry, but he thinks it's cut and dry, and we're very ignorant of it. And then through an effort, we might become slightly less ignorant of it. And yeah, I guess there's always that interesting dichotomy between like the social sciences and the physical sciences. And so he's asking the question why. So he kind of just says, yeah, it's pretty easy to explain why the physics and computer science and mathematics would be coordinated, distributed. There'd be a distributed coordination of those fields because they're all being coordinated by the search for truth about things that exist independently of like our will. Whereas the social sciences, it isn't clear that that's what's happening. And so, is there some other reason why the social sciences are coordinated in this way?
Yeah. And more broadly, he talks about how certain ideas find currency or fall out of favor. So he says that there's a market, or it's a Darwinian space of
He
ideas.
tries to have a Darwinian analysis, essentially.
Yeah, certain ideas will be more competitive than other ideas. And that basic framing I agree with. I think that's a pretty good way of viewing memes in like sort of in Richard Dawkins' sense of the word, not necessarily the image macro sense of the word, of these ideas which replicate themselves through time. And some of them will find more purchase with more people and outcompete those which don't find purchase with people. And as you were talking about with the hard base, in some way, the harder the science, almost the more simple the field and the more easily the truth value of something can be evaluated. So with something like mathematics, it's as compared to something like sociology. In some ways, it's a relatively, or at least the evaluation of truth in it is more straightforward than in the social sciences. So the
Well,
selection pressure of it being true or not is more easy to evaluate. In that, so in the most trivial example, 1 plus 1 equals 2 is it's more easily evaluated as true or not compared to some highly open-ended, uh, highly complex question of how a society operates.
yeah, that's fair. Well, because I'm
So that
a libtard fucking progressive cuck, I've been reading George Soros like a little bitch, and George Soros has he's a really interesting guy. Yeah, it's really interesting. Anyways, he's a big Popper fanboy, just like me. So I've been reading Para Popper.
Mhm, mhm.
I've been reading like there's this guy named well, there's obviously Soros, but then there's these other interesting like neo-Papirians who like apply or does how do we apply this to
Control the
mathematics
world.
and education and stuff, and some really interesting people, and Soros is one of them. And what's interesting about them is they actually like often criticize Popper and say like, well, how we don't think that, or I don't think that this thing that Popper said applies in this situation or whatever, or something like that. So it is interesting. But one of the things that Soros makes an interesting point about is he calls them reflexive phenomena. And the line that he draws a distinction between like social phenomena and like the physical sciences that Popper talks a lot about. And basically says like one of the main differences, or like the key difference, is that like the the atom isn't thinking about being an atom like when we study it, whereas like when we study humans, like the humans are actually thinking about like their own place in the world, what their actions are, their decisions, their morality, that sort of stuff. And so their ideas and their model of the world in their head is the thing that's being studied, but that's also the thing that like reflexively interacts with the phenomena. So if I'm trying to understand like how a market moves, I'm also trying to understand like how those people are thinking about the market, and then people's perceptions can like
Mhm.
interact with the actual underlying reality of it. So if a whole bunch of people like freak out and
Yeah.
like try start selling like a commodity or whatever, maybe the commodity was doing fine, but then because the people are freaking out because some ideas gone down into the zeitgeist, that could actually crash the price of the commodity, which then sets up a feedback loop, which drives the price even further down. And yeah, it's really interesting. So I don't want to talk about Soros too much, but I just thought that frame of like
Yeah.
reflexivity is a really interesting idea to pull into this one.
Yeah, well, it's layers of emergent complexity upon layers of emergent complexity. Because if we're talking about atoms, which are themselves layers of complexity upon the particles which make up atoms.
Which we know are made
If you're
of little
talking about
gorillas.
those, like I believe humans are made of
I
atoms.
believe
I don't
humans
think we're
are made out of
fundamentally
little
like
gorillas.
of something else. Which means that when you're trying to describe, for example, human behavior with psychology versus atomic behavior in physics, the phenomena you're trying to describe in psychology are just dramatically more complex, which I think goes much of the way to describing
More
why
complex.
why psychology has a hard time making as accurate predictions as physics. Because in psychology, you're basically describing the atoms as well. the same thing as in physics. Just all of the emergent complex phenomena which arise from all of these different interactions between atoms in the world.
But then
Like
also
you're just trying to describe so many layers of emergent complexity
in
above
addition,
above those which are described by physicists.
In addition to the like complexity, I suppose, like the cognition is actually like this thing that exists.
Yeah.
That is participating in the causal chains that exists in humans, and it doesn't exist in like a rock or whatever, unless you're like a panpsychist or something. But if you just think that the rock isn't
if you
cognizant
arrange
of its
atoms in
place
a
as a
very
rock,
specific way, they suddenly become aware of themselves and start behaving in a really unpredictable way.
Then start buying Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, that is the ultimate level of evolution. Once you start buying Bitcoin, you've ascended to the evolutionary level above human, and you buy a pair of Nikes.
You've left humanity behind. Once you start buying Bitcoin, when you start DCAing
you become
into
Rich
Bitcoin.
Piana, join Heaven's Gate,
and take off,
die and ascend to a comet.
So I think this is really
exactly
interesting.
What happened with Heaven's Gate.
So what he basically sets up in the first half is like he sets up this problem. He says there's this cathedral problem, and then he says, okay, well, let's draw a line between like the social sciences and the hard sciences or physical sciences. And then he's like, okay, well, we need a non. I read between the lines and thought like he's not going to take a conspiracy theorist, so a non-conspiratorial systems level explanation of why the social sciences coordinate when they don't have the same under conditions of reflexivity and complexity. And he applied a Darwinian analysis, which is basically saying like, what are the ideas that exist and what are the selective pressures in the different situations that would lead to one set of ideas or type of ideas like emerging as dominant in an institutional context versus like other selective pressures.
Yeah, that's a good formulation of how he sets it out, because basically the further you get from mathematics, from the relative simplicity of mathematics, he's saying you would expect more variation in people's beliefs. But he says within the cathedral, you have a significant degree of agreement on these very, very complex and quite unconstrained sociological questions, for example. You've got this Darwinian marketplace of ideas, and he's trying to explain why progressive ideas are so prevalent within the cathedral, and he does this by means of a parable. So you've got the continent of Mu, and you've got he loves his
parable.
He loves his parables. He loves his metaphors. They're basically in every essay of his. He'll have some goofy metaphor, and in this one we've got Mundana and Mutopia, or I guess Mundana and Mutopia.
Yeah, it must be
Mundana.
Mutopia.
Must be Mu, yeah.
Yeah. Or it's It's Mundana,
is a fucking based trad absolute monarchy with a state religion.
It's tradcore heaven.
Exactly. It's just like trad cath, trad wife, 1950s heaven.
Yeah. Everybody's just driving around in a Chevy, waving to each other. Great lawn.
Exactly.
You going to church today? Yeah. Hey, just gonna beat my wife first.
Of course I am.
give her a good hiding, then we'll go off to church, mate. Become an ontologically transformed base sigma male. That's literally what it says in the essay.
How trad are we talking? Yeah, exactly. Yes. How trad are we talking in Mundana? Because this is really important. Is it like Tradcath, which at least in Everland is not very trad at all, or is this more like Roman Empire trad, which is
this is Roman Empire trad? this is God Emperor. It's
like is the father of the family allowed to kill anyone under his roof or not?
Is the God Emperor allowed
That's what I want to know.
Kill anybody that they want?
This is very important when it comes to Yarvin's argument, I assure you.
Yeah, he doesn't clarify these things
enough. The level
of
tradness of Mundana is very important. And that's my biggest complaint. That's my biggest problem with this essay, is without knowing the level of trad of Mundana, I can't pass any of this information.
Oh, and there's one interesting thing about Mundana. Fuck this. Why did he choose this word? It's such a shit word. Mundana. Mutopia. Mundana. Mundana. Yeah, I'm
Mundana?
going
Well,
to.
but because like Mutopia is easy because it's like utopia, but like it must be Mundana because you've got the continent of Mu and you've got Mutopia,
Yeah, he
and so
he
it
didn't
must be
set this up
Mundana.
well for
Otherwise,
actually like being spoken out loud.
he should have provided a pronunciation guide, and as a result, he didn't. And I don't recommend this essay, and it's bad. And he's a Nazi.
He's a Nazi and he's a racist because he didn't clarify whether it was Mundana or Mundana.
He's literally Hitler. And that's just in Mein Kampf, all of the book is about that. That's what the entirety of Mein Kampf is about. And he's just echoing Hitler.
It's just Hitler is just clarifying how to pronounce Mundana.
That was actually all Hitler wrote in prison. He was just writing about the pronunciation of Mundana and Utopia.
And print Hello World.
Yeah, and print Hello World. Yeah. And that's all Curtis Yarvin's doing. And that's why he makes me sick. And
a curse on thee, Curtis.
Okay, so what is Mutopia?
Oh wait, I want to say one more thing about what
liberal
Mundana.
Democracy.
Oh no, sorry, no, progressive liberal democracy, but also it's like a democrat. I wrote democratic bureaucracy with a liberal cathedral.
Yeah, think the United States of America, but more progressive.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, he said there's like these liberals in both Mundana and Mutopia, but the liberals in Mutopia are a part of the cathedral, so they're in positions of power as professors and journalists in particular, and are in bed with the democratic bureaucracy. Whereas in Mundana, the liberals are like dissidents in the underground. They're like the dark. They're the dark enlightenment of Mundana.
Yeah, they're just like cowering in basements while an army of Ron DeSantis clones hunts them down, feeds them to alligators.
Kind of burns their books at their public library and then forces them to use Bitcoin.
They're just like scrabbling in the dirt, looking for Marvel movies, just being disgusting rodents. And Ron DeSantis will creep up behind him, give them both barrels,
like coloring in the skin, changing the skin color of like Marvel comic heroes. Before like an SS officer like busts the door down.
They'll be grabbing copies of Captain America comics and coloring them in black. Ron DeSantis though is coming to the rescue. He like rappels out of a helicopter and shoots them in the head.
With like an M16 in one arm.
That Captain America
smashes through. So funny.
Captain America has blue eyes.
Like introduces a CDBC just to ban it, and then forces everybody to use Bitcoin. You use this for your freedom.
Ron DeSantis is made into the like T-1000, and he's sent back in time to cleanse Marvel.
Yeah, so that's Mundana. It's run by God King DeSantis.
Yeah, Mundana.
With syphilis.
Run by God
Mundana
King
is
and
Florida.
Protected by the Terminator time traveling program of making robotic Ron DeSantises to travel back in time and make sure that we have a nice racially homogenous Disney.
Yeah, because we all know that Ron DeSantis is all about that racial homogeneity.
What a based world.
Super based. So based.
So based,
man. That's fucking based, bro.
BASTE.
Based. That's based like my turkey on Thanksgiving, bro.
We're just talking about. We just love
we
cooking.
Just really like cooking.
This is actually this has no politics behind it. I just really enjoy basting things.
Yeah, all about that based turkey.
All about basting. Fuck people who bake though. They should be basting.
We take sides on this podcast.
So what were you were talking about the selective advantage of dominant ideas before I started talking about Terminator on DeSantis.
Well, okay, so he's got this idea of dominant ideas versus recessive ideas. Dominant idea is an idea that validates the use of power, whereas a recessive idea,
the use and expansion of power,
is an idea that invalidates or um, like rebuts or whatever uh, the use of power. And so he says that dominant ideas, selective, like, will outperform recessive ideas in a context where, like, well, this is sort of the thing. I mean, I don't want to get too far into like starting to refute him, but I found like what I played this game in my head where I like substituted in. I did a substitution game where I replaced every time he mentioned dominant idea or recessive idea, I just replaced it with idea that validates or idea that invalidates. And once I did that, it became like really tautological. It's basically just saying like, yeah, if there's a set of ideas where there's like a power structure and you just say stuff that reinforces that power structure, then those ideas will be selected for. And once I started doing that, I was like, well, you're not kind of offering that much here. You're just saying that, like, yeah, if I reassert just like the paradigm, then that idea will survive. It's kind of like, well, that is what the paradigm is.
Yeah, I don't think I think it's a useful thing to bear in mind, but I don't think it's sort of world-shattering undiscovered knowledge. It's yeah, if you're saying stuff that the group in charge like, then you're going to do better.
But that's fine.
Is sort of in many ways what he's saying,
Yeah,
which is fine. I don't disagree with that.
But what I mean is like it doesn't really help explain what his it's not it didn't really it's like okay, but all you're saying is like it's almost it's not quite circular. It's like what well, but how did those ideas become the dominant idea? How like why is that power structured the way it is? And why is it selecting for those ideas?
So by itself, I don't think this idea is that useful because also in the it's not Mundana ideas that support the Tsar because he
Yeah, the
says
Tsar.
Mundana has
It's
a
got a
Tsar
Tsar.
because it's
That's
based
awesome.
are going to outcompete ideas that don't support the Tsar's continued power and expansion of the Tsar's power. But where this idea does come in handy is when he starts talking about how ideas are generated and validated in these two different societies. So in Mundana, ideas. So he, just for argument's sake, Mundana is an absolute monarchy, so or an absolute dictatorship. Like the Tsar says that he wants something and it just happens. So the way that ideas become more or less, I guess, selectively advantageous is just how much they appeal to the Tsar. So dominant ideas in that context are ones that the Tsar likes. In Utopia, there aren't restrictions on freedom of speech and things like that. So ideas exist in much more of a free market. They compete with each other. And so in such a context, you will have people like Curtis Yarvin who say that they don't like the expansion of progressive power, but those ideas are outcompeted by ideas that promote the expansion of state power or university power or the amount of money that journalists get. And so they become more prominent. I guess like a criticism I would have of this is I think he seems to be saying that this dominant recessive dynamic is not nearly as important in Mundana, in the autocratic state, because basically the Tsar just decides everything. And so this marketplace of ideas doesn't so much exist. I'd say that
Yeah, he
it
does.
does exist there as well.
Yeah.
It's just where is the selection taking place? It's taking place not in public, either behind closed doors or just in the Tsar's head. If the Tsar has no advisors or anything like that, there still is this dominant recessive dynamic.
Yeah.
It's just it's happening elsewhere. It's not that it doesn't happen. And he either like at my most generous, I will say he doesn't make that clear. Being not generous, I'd say he just doesn't address that.
He doesn't acknowledge. No, he actually. Oh no, I'll just pull up the article. Substack, Grey Era, Cathedral. Yeah, no, I actually think what he's saying is like, oh shit, where is the? Because I no, there's an actually he speaks about it directly. Oh yeah, no, he says the Tsar, whose public mind is a canon, not a discourse, gets almost exactly the same results as the Cathedral by the exact opposite methods. The Tsar punishes deviation from canonical thought. The Cathedral rewards conformity with dominant thought. So, like, he basically, I mean, he doesn't unpack, like, he doesn't really unpack it any more than that, but he just sort of asserts that in one society, just this like autocratic totalitarian society, the one man's mind is canon and not a discourse. And that is just not how any autocratic society has ever worked. And a really good example of this is Frederick Wilhelm III, Prussian, the king of Prussia, who like employed the German and Austrian like intellectuals to basically be essentially act as his cathedral. And the most famous of which is Hegel, which Popper goes after. That's the only reason why I know.
Our boy Hegel.
So Hegel is like, he's just like a little bitch boy cuck for Wilhelm, and just like pumped out this like nonsense, like Zizekian type fucking Nazi crap in order to like pump up the monarchy. And in that situation, like literally, like the Tsar had to use some sort of like academic institution to like push out and validate his ideas. And even in like the Roman Empire, that was very highly fractured, and there were competing factions, and there was always like a threat that, you know, you might be murdered even if you're the emperor. And even in places like that, you have like, there's no such thing as an autocracy where there's just like one man's mind is a canon and not a discourse. It might be harder, like I'm sure in North Korea it's really difficult for like dissent, and it's very dangerous, but it's just not how the physics work. You just can't like upload a single person's mind into a whole society. It doesn't work like that. And so there will always be like social dynamics to the diffusion and enforcement of ideas, even in a very totalitarian society.
Yeah, and I would say that this dominant recessive dynamic, even if we're just for argument's sake, this Tsar made all decisions by himself and imposed this canon by himself, and people actually followed it. This idea of dominant and recessive ideas
Still applies.
will still take place. It's just taking place in his mind. It's taking place in one person's consciousness.
Yeah. But there's also the choice that each individual person has to make to conform. And so it's going on at that level as well. And also, like, whenever you enforce, or whenever you inform, any enforcers or informers or conformers all have to make those same calculations in their own mind. They're not just automatons.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess in acknowledging that there is a progressive intellectual underground in Mundana, he's acknowledging that there are some people who are just going to disagree. Some people are just born that way. So
yeah,
he does acknowledge
he's just like put this dynamic strongly on Utopia, and then not acknowledge that because he's, you know, kind of the the catch is like he wants a monarchy, like he wants a strong totalitarian state of some form. And it's like, well, his assumption is somehow that you can have this like uniform hegemonic like way of thinking that's stable over time, like in terms like over generations.
I'd say actually, we can just talk about this later. I don't think he wants a totalitarian state. I think he wants a governance structure which is much more like that of a company or a military, where your responsibility is directed towards the top, and you have one person at the top in whom ultimate responsibility lies, or on whom it lies.
Yeah.
I don't think he's arguing for totalitarianism. It's just like you have a very restricted group of people making decisions,
like
in
oligarchical.
governance.
Maybe I need to read more of his stuff in order to like understand the nuances, because what you just said still sounds like totalitarian.
He doesn't seem to like an oligarchy as much because he says it leaks power, and he prefers a monarchy. However, the way that it would be run in practice, I imagine, is just going to be oligarchical, because absolute monarchs still have advisors whom they trust.
Yeah.
Like they
and
can't do everything
they still
themselves.
have bureau. Like even the Roman Empire had the Senate, right? So, and even North Korea has like the military arm.
Yeah, and he seems to want a bureaucracy and things like that. He says that's
Well, maybe I
okay. It's just
mischaracterized.
you need bureaucrats who actually have responsibility and don't seek to externalize
How does
responsibility,
he get out of the
which we'll
trap
get
of?
into because that's also that's part of his
How does
argument.
he get out of the trap of the whole like power, absolute power corrupts absolutely? Like, how does he get out of that? Have you read anything? How he gets out of that?
I'm not sure how he gets around that. So he does the way that he views a monarch seems to basically be a really, really, really powerful president.
Yeah,
So I'd assume there'd be some way of removing them from power and installing someone
an
new.
executive, but is it hereditary? Because I think if so, it's a hereditary executive.
I don't think it's hereditary.
Okay, so maybe we need to go and read some of his other stuff as well. Because this is like
I'd like
to
to
be fair,
read.
he like this essay is standalone. Like you can read this, and
Mhm.
I think it's fine standalone. And if we were to like talk more, like I already feel like I probably I can't really talk enough about like his other views on monarchy and stuff, like without having read more of his stuff.
Yeah. Well, there are a few things. So I think a lot of the value of this essay, at least in the context of this podcast episode, is that it allows a jumping off point to discuss other things.
Yeah,
And it is really valuable for that. Also, we did this because we've got quite a few requests for Yarvin.
but
And
Yarvin.
I find Yarvin interesting. I like reading what he has to say. And he keeps saying that he's going to publish a book and just keeps dragging his feet on it. And we want to do that book because that'll provide a much more holistic
Yeah, that would be good.
overview of what he believes, rather than this this essay in isolation, which we're focusing on, and then the scattered essays that I've read of his over the years.
Yeah, that's fine.
If he releases a book,
I hope he
we'll
does.
cover it, and yeah, we'll have probably a more fair on Yarvin
Yeah.
view of what he has to say.
So
Because
I'm happy to just call him a Nazi
with some of
and be
these,
done with it.
yeah, well, look, I do that anyway. I think he's literally Hitler.
He is actually Hitler. Like Hitler never died. He got a complete
Yeah, this
facial
whole thing is just
reconstruction.
written in German, and
Yeah.
I had to Google translate it.
And it's actually just Mein Kampf.
Yeah, it is. It's just Mein Kampf. That's all his Grey Mirror Substack is. Every time he posts anything, it's actually just Mein Kampf again. Anyway, now that we've established that Curtis Yarvin and Hitler are the same person,
Maybe I'm just not being fair. Maybe I'm not being fair on him or his ideas by
well,
saying
these are good things to bring up. It's yeah, we need to cover him more. If he doesn't end up publishing a book, then we can just pick a collection, like 10 essays that he's written and read those. But I would prefer if he published a book because that would make our lives a lot easier to properly cover Curtis Yarvin.
well, I might touch on another thing that he says. Pseudo information. He says when we remove pseudo information that has obviously evolved in this way, he's talking about like the dominant idea, like ideas that have evolved in a selective environment or an environment that is selective for just like reinforcing the dominant power structures. So when we remove pseudo information that has obviously evolved in this way, we are not left with the opposite of pseudo information, which would be presumably information, but an absence of information. So there's just a hole there. Whatever the signal reality is
Yeah.
sending us, we cannot hear it. All we know is that our institutions cannot hear, think, learn, know, understand, or teach any recessive ideas. That is, ideas that would damage or delegitimate the powers that be. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. So to contextualize that, I think this is in the context of he's talking about what's the quality of the ideas being produced by the liberal intellectuals in Mutopia versus those in Mundana. So he says that in Mundana, because these ideas are not dominant ideas, they find no purchase with those in power because they undermine the power of the Tsar and the Tsar's ruling apparatus. Their selective function, or what is selected for, is only truth and beauty. And I don't agree with that, but for now, we'll just go with that and say, okay,
You're like,
the quality
in
of the
my
idea, of the liberal
utopia,
ideas
only
in
ideas that are true
Mundana
will
is
proliferate.
higher, which I just don't agree with. I think that's incorrect.
He's
If we're
so
looking at
fucking
the,
full of it.
so for example, another fairly obvious selective pressure for liberal ideas proliferating in Mundana is hiddenness. So ideas which promote open resistance to the Tsar's security apparatus, for example, are going to be selected against because you get killed. And ones that promote passivity or remaining hidden will proliferate because the people who believe those will survive. So that's a, like, I get, it sounds like a trivial example, but he seems to be saying that only truth and only beauty are selected for in this. Whereas I just don't see that. There are so many other things that could allow an idea to spread within intellectual circles in Mundana. Similarly, I think while holding liberal opinions won't get you any sort of prestige in broader Mundanan society, people's contexts can be smaller than that of a state. So their social context could be the circle of liberal intellectuals. And within that group, holding opinions that agree with other people there will get you some sort of prestige. And so you still have those prestige dynamics. They're just operating on a smaller scale than in Mutopia. So, but okay, we'll just accept that in Mundana, the selective pressures for liberal ideas are such that only true or beautiful ideas proliferate. However, in Mutopia, because of the nature of the ruling class, dominant ideas which support the continued power of the ruling class, the ruling liberal class, and the expansion of that power, those ideas are going to proliferate because they're rewarded by the state, by journalism, and by academia.
Yeah, I think
So that was a really long way of situating what you were saying and addressing what sort of problem he's trying to solve with that.
yeah.
That got off track. Which is highly unusual for this podcast for us to get off topic.
It's like, and yeah, yep. No, so I think that's an interesting. So can I be honest?
No.
So I don't. How do I actually don't want to. I'm trying not to just go straight in.
I'd prefer you to be profoundly dishonest, as disingenuous as you can possibly be.
I'm trying not to just go full on bash like like we recently read Feminist Glaciology, and my criticism of my performance in that is I probably spent too much time in like critical bashing the ideas of like, so I don't want to spend too much time doing that, but I will just say some criticisms of this particular essay. One of my criticisms, and it's to the point where reading this essay actually made me skeptical of Yarvin's judgment with regards to Urbit. I was like, wow, if this person thinks like this, would I like, it's kind of like poison the well for me to like go and learn more about Urbit. And the reason why, but I mean, I know I should try to keep them separate because he might be a really good technologist, but like it's just very like black and white, oversimplistic thinking, and
yeah, that's a criticism I have too.
And it's not very helpful. Like we already sort of mentioned that he's like, well, the cathedral, okay, well, we disagree that that's even as dominant as he thinks it is, even if it is a dominant cultural force, but like it's not that simple. And then the second thing is like, okay, well, what about when he starts talking about the Moloch? It's almost like, I think I spoke about this on the bio-Leninism episode, which is also like they're in the same sort of part of the internet. The bio-Lenin, the guy who wrote about bio-Lenin.
Spandrel's like a much more racist and sexist and less interesting Yarvin.
Yeah. Like,
if I'm gonna,
but they're kind of in the same part of the internet, roughly. Like maybe not exactly the same part, but kind of they're like next to one another. Maybe.
Yeah. Spandrel is like the we have Yarvin at home.
Yeah.
Like Alibaba Yarvin.
Which is the Moloch fallacy. which is like I don't think that you can reduce any explanation of a human phenomena to like a Darwinian analysis of just the selective pressures without talking about like the fundamental aspect of humans, which is like creative creativity, essentially, like the ability to like create new ideas and criticize ideas, and like the to the degree like use your creativity for criticism. And like what is the thing that is actually like selecting is the human mind. And when you're confronted with an idea, even if you're living, even like say a slave or like a person living in a totalitarian regime, they're still running the same software as us. And they're using their creativity in part to survive in under duress, but also in part like they're thinking, well, like a good example is in the Cultural Revolution in China, like the people who enforced the conformity, they got really creative with how they enforced that shit. Like they, like with the
Yeah, growth mindset.
yeah. So it's like, okay, but those people weren't automatons. Like they weren't doing things. You don't just load ideas into a human like you do a computer, and then you just like watch the selective. Like if we put in this variation, like what will happen in the ecology? It's not like that. And so because he hasn't engaged at all with that aspect, or I would say that that's like in my assessment, that is like a such a fundamental part of the phenomena that he's talking about, that to not integrate that into his explanation essentially means that like it's not dealing with reality. It's like if you try to talk about electricity without talking about electrons.
All right, I'll be Yarvin
Yeah,
bot
be Yarvin bot.
again. I'll try to steelman it as Yarvin GPT. So maybe then he's talking about people in aggregate. So if you're looking at people on a societal scale, most people, when confronted with a series of circumstances or with the same circumstances, will behave in similar ways. And you have certain people who are outliers for whatever reason. So in this case, the people in Mundana who become liberal intellectuals, for example, or the people in Mutopia who become Curtis Yarvin. You'll have a subset of people who are just inclined to behave differently, but most people will respond in fairly similar ways to the same environmental conditions. Maybe that's what he's talking about.
And that's cool. So my
He's talking about
follow,
it
and
in
I
aggregate.
would say like cool, thanks. I think let's go with that. How then do you explain changes in dominant power structures and ideas? Like the ecology of, like, we just haven't had this same ecology throughout America. Like even if you just take America, like there's been plenty of times when there's been like much more right wing stuff going on.
Probably, well, there's no stable society. The society's so massively complex. Parts of it are always shifting. And many of those shifts might not even be initially caused by human beings. So, for example, maybe you have, at least in the past, a particularly harsh winter, which causes there to be a shortage of food. So that's a major perturbation to society, which will lead to different, yeah, people responding differently to changed conditions. Society is always in flux, and it's so complex
Mm,
because you have
mm,
so many different conscious entities interacting with other conscious entities and then responding to that interaction in turn. So there's always an instability or a non-linearity in human
yeah,
interactions. So it could just be as a response
yeah.
to that.
And uh why are like the actions of the dissidents in the US, say, against, like, is it Yarvin's perspective that the actions of people like himself, but even other people, like, I mean, you could even look at like Ben Shapiro or something as like creating a right wing or a conservative like independent media business. Like, um, are those actors and institutions just ineffective? Is that like, does he just think that they don't have any meaningful effect? Because it just, so this one, the reason why I'm asking this, because it just seems like he's setting up he's setting up basically like a really pessimistic, like, we can't get out of this, we're on this path dependent way to like a liberal hellhole, and the only solution to it is like monarchy or something. And it's just like, but then
Yeah, is revolution.
why build of it? Why are you speaking out against it? Like, you're obviously having an effect, you're building followers, and there's plenty of other people, and you're getting heaps of airtime. Like, it just seems like um his very existence and activity, and the fact that I can point at other people like Shapiro and stuff, like, it stands in stark contradiction to like the monolithic thing that he's talking about. Like, he lives in a society where people can engage in critical discourse from different points of view.
You're really pushing my ability as as Yarvin
Yeah,
Pike.
come on, Yarvin GPT.
Okay. Yarvin GPT's thinking. All right, so what once again assuming the role of Curtis Yarvin, what people like Ben Shapiro and Curtis Yarvin, what people like Ben Shapiro and what people like me, Curtis Yarvin, are doing. Fun. Okay, no, I'm not going to talk as Curtis Yarvin. It's going to be too hard. I'm not going to be able to be first person Curtis Yarvin. I can only be third person Curtis Yarvin. But so, what people like Shapiro and Yarvin are doing are fundamentally different. So, Ben Shapiro is still fundamentally of the liberal project.
Yeah, is the heel.
He is conservative, but he is conservative in a liberal context. An important question to ask with any form of conservatism is, what is it that you are conserving? Conservatism is it's a really interesting political philosophy because it doesn't actually have a set internal state. So, say when someone is a liberal, you can actually point to a series of beliefs. Well, I mean, if you're using liberal in the philosophical and not the American political sense. So, in the philosophical sense, if someone says they are a liberal, you can point to, say, John Locke's second treatise on government and say, okay, they probably believe a lot of this. There is an internal state. Whereas with a conservative, conservatism is more a posture. It's more a container and a posture towards prevailing views rather than a set series of beliefs. So a Saudi conservative is going to be seeking to conserve the present culture in Saudi Arabia, as opposed to an American conservative. Both of them hold the same posture towards the cultural context within which they exist. However, that cultural context can be very different. So Ben Shapiro is a conservative within the context of a liberal society. So he's not going to start arguing for having a monarch or something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas Curtis Yarvin actually is proposing a dramatic change. I don't regard him as conservative at all.
He's like anti-paradigm
and
or
so,
something.
Yeah, so what someone like Ben Shapiro is doing in whatever the fuck he's doing, like he's a professional complainer. What he does is he waits for progressives. I think he's a grifter. He waits for progressives to do something
so
and
funny.
then whines about how bad it is and how we need to return to a better time in the past, and doesn't change anything. Like, he's not proposing anything new. And that's why I think people like Ben Shapiro are just never going to win, because all he does is he's purely reactive. He waits for progressives to propose some change, whines about it. Society eventually accepts that change, moves on. He stops whining about it, and he picks the progressives' next cause to whine about. Whereas someone like Curtis Yarvin actually is proposing an alternative. He is proposing something new, which Ben Shapiro is not doing. As such, no matter how popular Ben Shapiro is, and sub in, like, Ben Shapiro is the smirking face representing all of these sort of political conservative grifters or professional complainers. No matter how popular they get, they're still not proposing something new. All they serve really is maybe slowing down progressivism somewhat, but they're not really changing they're changing the speed, but not necessarily the directional orientation of where culture is moving.
Yep.
Curtis Yarvin is pessimistic that existing within the current political paradigm will change anything. He is pessimistic about Ben Shapiro's project. The reason why he has things like Urbit is because he is creating exit strategies and a place to have something new, which when the progressive society collapses, which he does actually seem fairly confident that it will. He talks about collecting kit pieces as receipts to prove to the new regime that you were a dissident in the dark days of democracy. Yeah, Urbit exists as an exit strategy to create something new, or at least create an intellectual ferment, which can then replace the current order. So I guess like that's the best I can do to
That's
address your
fair. That's fair.
concerns.
And I think that's really interesting.
As
Like, I
Curtis
think that's a
Yarvin, I should add.
cool. That's a cool. Like, what's it called? The window, the thingy window. You know, yeah, fucking window.
The Overton
Yeah, the
window?
Overton window. Um,
Or which window?
yeah, the window I throw children out of. No.
The Archer window from Play
Yeah,
School?
yeah. Yeah, the Overton window. I think it's very.
Shout out to anyone who understands that reference.
Yeah, is it a square?
3 people listening will get that.
It's so funny. I think that in terms of having a very wide Overton window is good for society, and I think like it's good that we live in a world where Mencius Moldbug can build an online following. Even if I disagree with his ideas, I think it's a good thing that he can exist and build a following and put his ideas out there and go and have interesting conversations. And if one of the ideas that he's proposing is really strange in terms of like, just get rid of democracy altogether. Let's just go to monarchy or whatever. I think I can respect that there's a place for that. That's cool. And yeah, he's just like playing a different game. As you say, like exit strategies, even like Bitcoin, economic exit strategy. Crypto monarchy, whatever. Mundana is a political exit strategy, I suppose. I don't know. Good on him.
Well, he's not proposing for Mundana because Mundana has a revolution too. Like he says that it's not a good society. But he's not advocating for Mundana.
Is that because he's not the God King?
That's point one. No, to be generous to him, he says that. So when like later in this parable, there are revolutions in both Mundana and Mutopia, which improve both societies. He says this is the best case scenario. Both the ruling groups are overthrown. In the case of Mundana, you have a ready-made ruling class, and that's the intellectual liberal underground of Mundana, who were previously persecuted by the Tsar and the Tsar's secret police, because these people have existed within an intellectual milieu where only good, beautiful, or true ideas are selected for. And like we've been over my problems with that framing, but fine, we'll just accept that they've existed in this intellectual environment where good or beautiful ideas are selected for, and they get into power and they rule well because they have been developing good ideas selected for truth. Like they're ruling on the basis of true ideas. That's as opposed to Mutopia, where liberals were already in charge. But because of this dominant recessive uh, dynamic of ideas, they had no way of actually evaluating whether the ideas they were having were true or not, which is back to what you were saying about pseudo information. Because ideas in that context were only selected for based on whether they supported the liberal power structure of Mutopia, you had no way of actually evaluating whether they were true or not. If they supported the power structure, then the Utopian Cathedral would take them up. He uses the example of climate change. He's like, okay, in Utopia, climate alarmism promotes state power because it costs a lot of money. It would lead to more funding for universities, and journalists can talk about how bad it is. So that's a dominant idea. It's going to be selected for because it provides a justification for expanding utopian state power. He says in this context, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but that's not actually being evaluated for. Again, in the real world, I just think you can have ideas evaluated on the basis of both whether it selects for an expansion of power and whether it's true or not. I don't think it's mutually exclusive in quite the way that he seems to be intimating.
Yeah. There's plenty of ideas that
fine.
are
Anyway, so
prominent because they're true. like Maxwell's equations, pretty fucking common in pretty common use. Yeah.
Yeah, and those equations are selected for on their truth value.
And their usefulness.
So you could,
Yeah.
I think he did address this earlier in the essay when he said that even in the most totalitarian regimes, they have maths, science, and engineering that works. So, for example, in the North Korean regime, like incredibly intellectually repressive, but when it comes to rocket technology, they want rockets that fly and preferably hit the United States of America with big, beautiful atomic payloads, which also work.
So they do like nuclear physics.
They still want engineering and physics that work. So I think actually he did address that Maxwell's equations criticism earlier in this piece.
But what about social? Are there dominant social ideas that are dominant because they're true?
This is like this gets into a much more difficult question of what do you regard as true. So I would say at the very least, there are like, this sounds silly to say, but it's important to bear in mind. There are certain behaviors which reliably lead to certain results. And insofar as you value those results, then you probably value these ideas. So not stealing stuff reliably leads to a more stable ability for people within a social group to accumulate wealth and be more secure.
And trust and that sort of thing. Yeah.
It can have all sorts of downstream effects like big differences in income, which themselves lead to instability. But you're probably going to have more stable societies where people minimize how much they steal from each other than those where stealing is,
you mentioned this, Jack,
not only neutral, but those where it's encouraged.
Can we try to find like some obscure,
or murdering each other?
Can we try to find some obscure like online writer who actually does actively advocate for stealing off people?
Yeah, Karl Marx.
Oh no, wait, sorry, that's Keynes. Don't worry about it. And the Royal Bank of the Reserve Bank of Australia. Fucking no good fucking thieves.
Next episode, it's going to be the latest RBA report. We'll just read through it and do a running commentary.
Read through and explain why it's a bunch of pseudoscience nonsense. You know, they show graphs. I'm not going to go on too much of a rant about this, but I've been reading like Keynesian economics.
That's not true. You're going to have a good Keynes rant.
The RBA's explainers, and they show graphs of like, it's called a aggregate demand, aggregate supply. You know, they show graphs without axes, like without like units and stuff.
Yeah, you don't need those.
And they say this is aggregate demand, and it's like, yeah, but what? Like, how come you put aggregate demand and supply on the same graph? And why? And
it is going up.
And why is GDP here? And it's like, and you know that if you graph something on the y-axis against something on the x-axis, you're actually saying that the thing on the y-axis is a function of the thing that's happening on the x-axis. So what's the equation, and why is that a function? And they just never explain this. And maybe that's just because I'm reading like high-level stuff, and there's people who go into the nitty-gritty details of it, and I'm just a pleb. But I think if anybody ever shows you a graph and they haven't labeled the axes and put units on it, like, you just got to like slap them in the face.
Yeah, I will fully support you
slapping the RBA.
Yeah, like. I don't. It's not a matter of reading high level stuff or not. Like, if you are showing a graph, label your fucking axes with units. And if you don't do that, I will come to your house in Minecraft and hug you.
And, don't say, oh, well, it's an explainer from the RBA, like it's supposed to be for the general public. Blah, blah, blah. Like,
label your fucking axes.
The general public wants you to label the fucking axis, you piece of shit. Like, the general public isn't full of a bunch of idiots.
I didn't know the RBA did this, but this is beyond a pet peeve.
I'll send you the explainers of how they try to explain how the economy works.
It is disgusting.
Yeah, a bunch of idiots.
It is repulsive. I'd rather see them print a swastika than an unlabeled graph. Like, that's just repulsive.
Truly repulsive. And these people have been through the fucking cathedral education system, fiat cucks. You know what? Fuck it. I'm on board with Yarvin. I fucking pro Yarvin. Let's bring in the crypto monarchist Yarvin state.
Man, I didn't know that they were printing graphs with that.
It's fucking ridiculous.
Damn, that's really disappointing. I'm not going to ever pay tax again if it's going towards unlabeled graphs. I will go to prison for unpaid taxes if that's where my tax dollar. Those okay, fine. Take my taxes and invade a country on the other side of the earth that has nothing to do with us. Fine. But don't you dare use a single dollar I've paid to print an unlabeled graph.
It's just like you're you can buy helicopters for some
bomb some
foreign
villages
regime.
Bomb some innocent people in another country. Whatever.
Fuck it. But print a goddamn unlabeled graph. No units. I'll be calling for a revolt. Goddamn revolt.
I will be organizing a revolt. And we'll be marching for the specific reason of, in Minecraft, burning down the parliament in Canberra so that we can institute a new one based around the principle of labeling graphs.
But we still just
Parliament could do whatever else at once. I don't care. And
just so you know, we're not getting rid of
all graphs. We're
not getting rid of the Keynesian economics. Like I still want to, like when I become the all powerful czar, I want to steal your wealth through monetary expansion. But at least when I put out my pseudoscience nonsense, I will label my graphs.
No, you see, as a ruler, I would be politics agnostic. I only care about graphs. You can have whatever political system you want, whatever. I just want you to label your axes.
Your single issue.
Your politics are really not my concern.
Single issue voter here, Jay.
We're a single issue party.
Crypto Nukes Australia has
just want you to
Crypto
label your
Nukes
axes.
Australia has 3 core pillars: 1, crypto; 2, nukes; and 3, labeling the fucking axes. Labeled axes. We're bringing back labeled axes to this bitch.
We've come up with a new policy for nuclear Queensland. Finally. We're now a 3-issue party.
We're a sophisticated party. We even have an icon now, thanks to I don't know who sent it to me. Was it on Discord? Trent, I think. Trent created a cool
J-Man's made a bunch of
was it J-Man?
flags for us, and Trent is making this like crown badge.
Yeah, the crown badge. Trent.
With mushroom clouds and Bitcoin logos
and a little
and
emu
stuff
and
like
a
that.
kangaroo and shit. It's so good. I just noticed it's got like he's put like a little dumbbell on it. That's so funny. That's awesome.
It's got like dumbbells, SE5s, dolphins.
That's so fucking good.
There's
a tiger really on it. There's a tiger emblem on the Bitcoin logo. That's so good. Yeah, shout out to everybody on the Discord, but especially the people who are getting into the emojis and the fucking icons and shit. It's awesome. Coat of arms for the show for Crypto Nukes Australia.
Shout out to Namtam, who made a black metal version of our theme song.
Nice. We should use that as like the outro or something. do the classic intro. And then
Actually, for this episode.
Do the outro, heavy metal outro. That's cool. Yeah. Send us, like if you guys want to. Okay, are we finished with the essay, and we can just do a little bit of community shout out?
No, we've still got some stuff to go.
Fuck you, community. No, don't fuck you. We fucking love you. I take that back.
We're deleting the Discord. Okay, so why can't the cathedral be repaired? So this is his he's not going to try to reform this system. He's going to overthrow it personally. So he says we can't repair the cathedral because the cathedral's not actually even the problem. So the problem really lies in the factors which make the cathedral operate the way it does. He uses an analogy of a beautiful, clear mountain lake, which gets covered in green algae. And this happens because there's a pig farm nearby, and pig manure is being dumped into a stream feeding this lake. This is a subtle analogy, but the algae growing in the lake, that's the cathedral. So what is allowing the cathedral to grow? Well, this pig shit is a metaphor for power leaking. From, in addition to fiat currency, it's also power leaking from the dominant power structure. But mostly fiat currency. Yeah, so why does it leak? So he says that it's because most of society is run on the basis of a bureaucracy, of a civil service, and this civil service seeks to externalize all responsibility. Why is this the case? Well, no manager in this system has any sense of responsibility. They're not actually managers because they have no sense of initiative. They're just exception managers. So everything is run by a process, and you've got a manager there
Exception handlers.
to fix a problem if some sort of problem
The
arises
government just
in
runs in
carrying
Java.
out this process.
IO exceptions.
It's actually just a series of computers running Java.
Printing hello world.
There are no humans employed by the state. They just pay the computers.
Yeah, you could just like feel the intense vitriol Yarvin has for public servants coming through his like one too many bad DMV experiences. He's just goes fucking crazy about his like getting his license renewed. And
he just waited in line for Centrelink for too long, decided to become Mencius Moldbug. That was his supervillain moment.
Whilst he was at UC Berkeley, he got sick of waiting in line at Centrelink. So he went crazy and started talking shit about academics.
Yeah, he was at UC Berkeley in the US, but he was still drawing on Centrelink, and the Australian government said no to him, and that's when he became Mencius Moldbug.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's Centrelink. That's why we should abolish Centrelink. Just should go to zero.
Get rid of it.
That's why I think we should get rid of Centrelink, so we don't have any more Curtis Yarvin supervillain moments. It's just a liability.
They're creating the problem.
I'm running for office in Australia, and I expect you all to vote for me. And my one issue that I will become an MP on the basis of is getting rid of Centrelink.
Instantly elected.
And I won't replace it with anything. I'll just delete it. Just one day to the next. I will be the delete Centrelink party.
Just overnight, just millions of Australians just no longer have that income. Like, yeah, should have bought Bitcoin.
Don't have enough food to eat.
That's it. Don't have any housing. Buy some crypto, you little bitches.
Yeah, but
they will. They will because it's
I reckon
it's in their interest.
This issue has broad appeal.
To have more freedom.
It's completely in their interest.
Have more
to delete
to get
Centrelink.
rid of Mencius Moldbug 2.0.
Yeah. Anyway, so bureaucracy seeks to always externalize responsibility. So what they do is they go to the cathedral, and this is where the power is leaking from. So instead of anyone in the bureaucracy or the civil service making decisions, what they do is they'll outsource policy decisions to universities, to university professors, and they'll outsource effectively PR and criticism to journalists. And because these two institutions making up the cathedral, academia and journalism, are now sharing in the leaked power of government, their interests become aligned with government. They seek to expand the power of government because that is going to expand their own power, and that is the coordinating function. So he's now found this organizing function that he was asking about at the beginning of this essay. It's this power leak from the civil service, which is what keeps the constituents of the cathedral moving in intellectual lockstep. In terms of fixing this, he says, okay, you can't reform it because fundamentally the form of government we have at the moment is one which leaks power. The type of government, funnily enough, that doesn't leak power is a monarchy.
Never leaks power. Never has any monarchy ever leaked power. Never happened.
So the thing is, okay, so a criticism I have here, he talks about the iron law of monarchy, which I forget which thinker, it was one of the Italian Machiavellians who came up with. It might have been Gaetano Mosca, but I'm not sure. I've certainly read about this idea in James Burnham's The Machiavellians, which apparently Curtis Yarvin really likes as a book. And I like it too. I'd recommend that book. I think it's a really interesting one. But there's this idea of the iron law of oligarchy, where basically all societies over time are going to start moving towards an oligarchic system of government where you have a relatively small group of people making decisions for the majority.
Yeah.
And he says that in democracy, this happens and you get a power leak. However, I'm not sure why that wouldn't also be the case for a monarchy. So why wouldn't a
He
monarchy
just
also
says
revert to this or obey this iron law of oligarchy? So initially, for argument's sake, you have this absolute monarch who doesn't want to leak power because I don't know, they just don't. But over time, they get advisors. They need to delegate responsibility for things because you can't run a whole society as one person, no matter how optimized you are.
there's too much information throughput. You have to have some sort of hierarchy where you distribute
Yeah,
control.
yeah, yeah. And through that process, you'd probably also get an oligarchy arising.
Yeah, I don't know what fucking
That
planet
that's a
Yarvin
power
is
leak.
living on. He doesn't see
Um,
this.
yeah. With other places where I've disagreed with him, I could really try to steel man his position. And yeah, I don't
Squint a bit. Yeah,
agree with the steel man. And oftentimes, like in this episode, as I'm sure listeners have
you've
noticed,
done a great
my
job.
steel mans have kind of stretched very generously what Yarvin's been
You've done a
saying.
really
But
good
in this
job.
case, it's pretty hard to even steel man that.
You've done a really good job of impersonating Jack as well. Good work, GPT. Could you
Thank you. My name is actually
yeah,
Curtis. I'm a 50-year-old man living in the United States impersonating a 30-year-old Australian podcast host.
whilst trying to get Centrelink for my incomplete Berkeley PhD.
Well, just for
Everything
everything.
just is trying to get the NDIS money from Australia.
He's just all about hitting up the Australian welfare state for payments as a
and then
non-citizen.
advocating a monarchy.
Why do they keep knocking me back?
Fuck.
Exactly. A foreign state's welfare state keeps knocking me back whenever I ask for money. So we need a monarchy. That's actually the motivating factor behind why he's a monarchist. Because the Australian state won't give him those Centrelink bucks, those Anthony Albanese bucks.
Albo bucks.
So what was I saying? Oh yeah, this whole thing about how monarchies don't leak power, I just don't think is true. I think it's flat out false.
Maybe somewhere else in his philosophy, he explains how, in his particular conception of monarchy, that doesn't happen.
So at least, okay, so this is a combination of me thinking out loud and me being generous. So his conception of a monarch does seem to be much more in line with that of a CEO rather than Louis XVI.
That's cool, but Jack, how
So
how
hmm,
how can he simultaneously say that and then not say that it's not a totalitarian state or like an authoritarian state? Like, how can you have a power structure that's invested in one like top pinnacle CEO or executive or whatever you want to call it that does not leak power and yet is also not a totalitarian state of some sort? Like, to me, I mean, I may have just got to read his book when he finally publishes it, but to me, that's like those are contradictory statements.
so I guess we need to separate out authoritarian and
Yeah, sure.
totalitarian. So I think you can have, like, basically all authoritarian states except totalitarian states are not totalitarian. So totalitarianism is something very specific, wherein you have an absolute state which encompasses all aspects of society. Whereas you can have an authoritarian state where decisions are made by a limited group of people, but there can exist society outside of that state's purview. A major distinction between authoritarianism and totalitarianism. I don't think he's advocating for totalitarianism.
No, but his authoritarianism.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very explicitly. Like this is he's not hiding this for listeners who haven't read Curtis Yarvin. He certainly doesn't hide the fact that he wants an authoritarian state, like the state under a monarchy.
that agrees with what his perspective of the world is.
In some of the other things of his that I've read, he seems to talk about the monarch more as like maybe almost like for Americans, like a super FDR. Like imagine the powers that FDR accumulated, but go way further. In some ways, like a super president, like a president that can do way more, but you can get rid of if you need to. but at the
I
same
think he's
time,
living in La La Land.
yeah, I'm trying really hard to steel man this one. In part, I'm not doing as good a job because I just haven't read enough Curtis
I'm
Yarvin.
not putting in any effort right now to steal man him. Sorry. My apologies.
No, the dynamic of one of us criticizing and one of us steel manning, I think, has served us well in the past.
I think okay, so let's just say like okay, Yarvin, what we'll give you your opportunity. Let's just say you get like one of the states to run your experiment where you get to like say set up the monarchy um for that state or whatever, secede from the union and see what happens. Like presumably does he just think that the monarch will do all the things that Yarvin thinks are the right things to do? Because what if Yarvin disagrees with what the monarch wants to do?
I guess maybe it's not a bad point you make. Okay, so
because it always just seems like when
maybe
people
okay,
okay,
so
yeah,
all right. How about this?
yeah.
How about this? So back to what he was saying about the selection functions for different ideas. So in a state that leaks power, you're going to have these dominant and recessive selective dynamics more strongly. And what that leaked power does to a marketplace of ideas is it distorts the selection functions such that ideas are not selected for on the basis of whether they're true or useful. No, whether they're true or not, they're selected for on the basis of supporting current power
Sure.
structures, of the power that is leaking into that
Yeah.
marketplace of ideas. So I guess if you have a system which doesn't leak power, the marketplace of ideas will be selecting for ideas more in the way that, for example, the mathematical marketplace of ideas selects for ideas. It'll select for them on the basis of truth,
Okay.
which naturally means that they would be the same as Curtis Yarvin's ideas. How does that sound? Like I'm just ad libbing here. Like, I don't actually know if that's what he said. I
Because what if
That's
the
my best attempt
marketplace
at
of
trying to
ideas okay,
trying to
and
square
does
that.
will the monarch what if the monarch just doesn't what if the monarch just says, "Yeah, well, I don't care if that's what's true, like I don't like it," and just eradicates the idea?
Well, you're beginning to hit on my problems with monarchism.
And what if one of those ideas are Curtis Yarvin's ideas? Like to me, whenever I hear
Yeah, these are the sorts of things that I can't. It's just much harder to steel man these
whenever I
things.
hear
So
somebody advocating authoritarianism, they're always
okay, so
just
he's a big fan of he really admires, for example, Deng
right.
Xiaoping in China. China's an interesting political example. So China has not really been able to solve the so-called bad emperor problem in a particularly good way. In that,
The problem is the emperor.
in China, at least, okay. So let's even just say, okay, in communist China, when they have good leadership, it's fairly well run. Like there are plenty of things there that I would struggle with, like the restricted freedom of speech and things like that. But in terms of, say, pulling millions of people out of poverty, modernizing their infrastructure, and things like that, the Chinese rulers have done a good job. And when the leadership is good and they have that much power, things function reasonably well. However, when you get, as you were saying, this bad ruler who just says, "Okay, even though this idea might be true, I don't like it and I'm not going to do it." What do you do then?
Is it some sort of function that
And that's
forces error correction on the monarch
yeah, and that doesn't have to be elections or something. Like that doesn't have to be a democratic error
and
correction.
isn't violent, or does it have to be a violent overthrowing of the monarch? And then my point is basically just that
Maybe you just like put a shock collar on them, and whenever they make a bad decision, you just give them a
you
zap.
blow their head off.
Zzz. Yeah, or you get a
Yeah.
shotgun collar,
Like out of
which just
Saw.
blows their head off as soon as they make a bad decision. So there's no room for learning. You just make a mistake and
Next.
die.
Who's up next? Who's going to volunteer to be the monarch next? Nobody puts their fucking hand up. Just turns into anarchy. um, yeah, no, my point was basically just whenever I hear an authoritarian advocating authoritarianism, it always just seems to me like they're just advocating for them to be the authoritarian ruler. And they're just saying, like,
yeah, which would be mad if I were the authoritarian ruler. I agree with everything I believe. It's crazy the amount of overlap there is.
yeah. It's like, yeah, no. What we really need is like some strongman president that just has all of my point of view. Yeah. And anybody who disagrees, like, they don't want to actually like submit their
Yeah,
ideas to the
exactly.
brute force of criticism by like social discourse. What they want to do is they want the political system to enforce it on everybody else. Which means, like, I think, like, at the end of the day, if you think that your ideas are good, put them out there in the world and see what happens. And if you need to enforce them at like the end of a rifle, then maybe they're not actually very good ideas.
Which actually, so Curtis Yarvin has been submitting his ideas for a long time to public
Which is good.
criticism.
And
He's
props to
been
him for that.
publishing them
For 20 years.
The comments section on Grey Mirror, like on his Substack, is
Yeah.
very, very active. And there are people there who are really engaging with the ideas that he's put out and criticizing them. And that's cool.
That's great. And so do you think that
Would I want to live in Curtis Yarvin's monarchist society? No. But I am glad that we do have people who are putting out like very unpopular ideas and encouraging people to engage with them. I do
my
think
last
that's
question
valuable.
is, are you just trolling Yarvin? Is he just doing the bad guy public, like, all publicity is good publicity? And he's just like just trolling to get more publicity.
No, I doubt
How much
it.
of it? What component? Like, okay, maybe it's not all, but like, what component do you also think that he's just like a little bit like, all right, I'm going to say something provocative just because I know that, like, just to put a thorn in the side of this whole thing.
I think you can be reflexively contrarian without subscribing to the all publicity
Yeah,
is good publicity. I think those things are separable. So I think he's almost certainly someone who just enjoys being in opposition,
getting a rise out of people.
and that's fine. I definitely feel elements of that in myself. I can
Really?
definitely
No.
sympathize and
No.
empathize.
What? You, Jack? Nah.
So I think he's definitely temperamentally inclined to disagree with what most people believe. But I don't think he's being
Yeah.
insincere. I'd say he does really believe what he's saying here. And he has had blowback from it, actually. So I think he was invited to a bunch of developer conferences in the
Yeah.
software world and had to leave because there was outcry among participants that he was part of it. And these were not events about politics. These were events about software, and he would be talking in a technical capacity, but he was dropped from the ticket for his political beliefs. So
Yeah,
he
that's a
has
shame.
actually suffered consequences for being so public with beliefs which are so far outside the Overton window. So I really don't think he's being insincere. I think he believes these things, and I think he's meaningfully trying to solve problems, which is why, despite the fact that I don't agree with plenty of what he says, I enjoy reading him and I do take him seriously because I think he is in good faith trying to solve problems.
Yeah. 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 He's an interesting thinker at any rate. I'm enjoying reading some of his Bitcoin stuff. I'm not convinced about the monarchy stuff yet, but yeah, it's still interesting.
That'll come, Levi. It's a natural consequence of
That'll
liking
come.
cryptocurrency.
Yeah, it's like
Becoming a
start
monarchist.
DCAing Bitcoin, and then you become a crypto monarchist. And then you subscribe to Grey Mirror.
You buy your first ASIC and immediately become a monarchist.
What do you reckon? Have we finished Are there any other major ideas that you think are worth covering?
Yeah, I'd say we've gone through all this. I would be very open to doing more Yarvin, particularly if he finally comes out with that fucking book that he keeps promising.
If he comes out with a book,
Because
I'd
that
be
would be
open
good,
to
because
reading
then
it.
we can more holistically engage with his ideas rather than
Yeah.
talking about this article in isolation, plus like me with my goldfish memory trying to remember what I read about him over the
Past
past
12 years or
10
something, yeah.
years.
So,
Yeah,
props to
yeah.
Yarvin for being a weirdo and putting your thoughts out there for like such a long time and sticking to like being a sincere advocate of an alternative opinion. Yeah, props to him also on his technical accomplishments. That's quite impressive. Um, I hope that he writes a book so he can address, and maybe like if he writes his book, he can also talk about like what things he still thinks and what things he's maybe learnt on and moved on from. Yeah. So Curtis, if you're listening,
Yeah,
write
yeah.
that book, mate.
If you're listening, come on the show.
Join the Discord.
We can read Carlisle together. Yeah. So I would recommend reading
Yeah,
this.
read Grey Mirror.
This
It's
is
really
this is a
interesting.
really short
Yeah.
essay. Like, this is really quick to get
Yeah,
through.
like he could have easily have just
He's
read his
a
essay.
really, really clever guy who's extremely well read, who has thought about these things a lot. He's come out with opinions that are very different from not even just mainstream opinions, but the direction of mainstream opinions. He's quite directionally different from most other people you're going to hear.
He's tried to go off axis.
And while ultimately I don't agree with his conclusions, and I don't agree with actually many of his diagnoses of problems, it's really
I just
valuable
really just disagree
to
with everything the guy says, really.
no, I think it's really, really valuable to read things written by people who are smart and acting in good faith. Because I
Yeah.
do think he's writing in good
Yeah.
faith. Because it forces you to examine your own worldview. And so when you read something written by Yarvin, something that he has thought about, and which he's telling you not because he's trying to, not because he has some ulterior motive, but because I think he really does care about bringing about a better political
Yeah,
system.
he's not trying to sell you some shit in this essay. He's actually exploring ideas.
You have to explain to yourself why you don't agree with something. And I think there is real value to
Yeah.
that. Yeah, so I'd recommend reading this.
I've enjoyed reading some of his stuff. Yep, it's good. It's interesting. It's outside of my normal reading. Let's say that.
It's an understatement. Yeah, and also when you read it, or if you read it, don't be fucking lame and get 3 sentences in and go, "Oh, this guy is literally Hitler. I don't like it," and then stop. No, if you disagree with it, and you like probably you will, actually work out why. Don't be a fucking cuck and just say, "Oh, I don't like it because I don't like it." Work out why. It's important.
It is, Jack. It's very important.
Anyway, I don't have much more to say. Next week, I think we'll be
Storm of
doing
Steel.
Storm of Steel
Yeah,
by
that's
Junger.
exciting.
We were initially going to do Storm of Steel this week and then
But
Yarvin.
Levi's too slow a reader.
But like we need more time to read Storm of Steel. So we'll move on from monarchism to next week, Junger talking about the First World War and getting shot
weird.
repeatedly.
All right.
I'm really looking forward to talking about Junger. That guy was a fucking maniac.
Pretty crazy. All right. Thanks for listening. Join the Discord. That's all.
Thanks for listening.